Today, we'll look at multiple types of grief. Anticipatory grief is the grief that is experienced before a loss. Abbreviated grief is a grief where individuals are able to move through quickly, mainly many times because they have been going through the anticipatory grief and have done a lot of the emotional load or labor or work in that process of anticipatory grief. And so they've done a lot of work which enables them to move through this grief quickly. Then there is the delayed grief. These are the emotions that are felt days, weeks, and even months later. I have a friend that I lost recently, a best friend last year. When I check into her sister, months later, she was saying, "Deb, I still am shocked that my sister is no longer here." That is delayed grief. Also, there is the inhibited grief. This grief involves repressing one's emotion. Repressing the emotion because, for one, sometimes people are not trained just how to grieve, or they're so consumed with the planning of a funeral and taking care of wills that they're not able to express their grief in this short moment. I recall having a friend whose husband was passed away, and she planned everything to every minute details. But the day of the funeral, she was inconsolable. That type of grief was inhibited because she was so engaged and busy that she wasn't able to really engage in her emotions and to process them. The next grief that we have is the cumulative grief. This type of grief is when you're working through multiple types of grief simultaneously, and this process can be very difficult. It can be very challenging. It can be complex and even disorienting because you sometimes lose your sense of self, of being, and what's essential, what's priority, and so it makes matters very complicated. The final grief here is collective grief. This type of grief is grief that is found in the community. Grief such as war. When you think about the countries that are going through war, when you think about the innocent children that are suffering, we grieve these things as a community. War, COVID, losing our sense of normalcy, and now having to find a new way of making new meaning. These, my friends, bring about a plethora of grief types, and later on we'll talk about those symptoms, because you see, sometimes if we don't really engage our emotions, especially when they're repressed, we can have upset stomach, insomnia, we can have panic attacks, we can have a plethora of physical ailments because the grief is not expressed. As I often say, grief is like a pressure cooker.